Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hello, I'm Hadley Heath Manning, Director of Policy at Independent Women's Forum and your host for today's Working for Women podcast. Today I'm here with Patrice Onwuka, Senior Policy Analyst at Independent Women's Forum, and we're going to be discussing a recent report that showed that support for the Democratic Party may be declining among Black women specifically. And Patrice wrote about this in a column for Newsmax, where she is a contributor. So I'm anxious to hear her thoughts. And Patrice, I hesitated when I said your name because I wasn't sure if you go by Patrice Onwuka or Patrice Lee Onwuka. Do you go
Patrice
by
Onwuka?
Okay, fully transitioned to the married name now. So
yeah.
Thanks for joining me for today's podcast. First, I was hoping we could look back a little bit and get a little context for what's going on politically today. Because I've seen polls, for the last few presidential elections that show that more than 90% of Black women are supporting Democratic candidates. And this was true for President Obama, then I guess we should say former President Obama, and even for Hillary Clinton, who, of course, opposed Donald Trump in 2016. So that's a pretty overwhelming majority. I mean, I can't think of any other subset of voters that has that strong of a partisan bent. So this is not just something that the media is making up, that there's sort of a love fest between Black women and the Democratic Party. Although I did see in the New York Times right after this year's election, the headline that says, "A year after Trump, women and minorities give groundbreaking wins to Democrats." So it seems like the trend is holding pretty strong, that women, and especially Black women, are big-time supporters of the Democratic Party. So I want to get your thoughts on why that is. How did that come to be? And why is there such strong support for Democrats among Black women?
I think the strong support among Black women, it's consistent among, the Black vote in general. And we can go back to, I think, two pivotal points in the past century when before that, Blacks voted equally for Republican candidates as they did Democrats. And the first was, around 1948, when Harry Truman really pushed for some civil rights. And he also banned he instituted a federal ban on lynching. So I think Blacks at that point said, "Wow, okay, we're going to start to reconsider how we're going to start voting." And then again in 1964, you have the Civil Rights Act. And I think after that, and I've looked at some of the trend lines. Those two times are pivotal in cementing support among Blacks for the Democratic Party. And so right now, generally, Republicans will get between 8 and 10% of the Black vote, on a good presidential election year. But then when we look at women, the support is even stronger, and I think it's because Black women, have a very high voter participation rate. They're not just voting at a high rate; they are registered to vote at a high rate. They are engaged at the local level in civic, in politics, and civic participation is very high among Black women, in part because I think they shoulder so much of the burden of ensuring their family is taken care of. And unfortunately, I think, they fall in very much for the belief that government is best at providing for them and taking care of their needs rather than looking to the private sector. And there may be some failings from, when we look at kind of how the private sector has provided those that market of ideas and opportunities. But I still don't think that government solution is the best solution. Nonetheless, a lot of Black women do think so, and so you're seeing kind of the high voter participation and turnout rate, and they have done a great job in putting President Obama into office. In even this past Tuesday, 90% of Black women voted for the Democratic candidate for Virginia's governor, compared to 47% of white women. So they are the underpinning of the Democratic Party. The question is whether the Democratic Party really acknowledges their issue.
Well, so this brings us to what you wrote about in your column, and I think this is actually comes ultimately from a report called "The Power of the Sister Vote," and so I want you to talk about that because it seems like there's been maybe a little shift recently that suggests that Black women could be disillusioned with the Democratic Party, or that strong, rock solid support may not last forever. So can you tell us a little bit more about that trend and what it means?
Sure. So Essence Magazine, which is kind of one of the well-known Black magazines, they partnered with the Black Women's Roundtable to poll thousands of Black female voters and ask them, about kind of whether the Democratic Party or any of the parties really speaks to their issues. And interestingly, 3 out of 4 Black women who were polled said that they do, 74%. Now that sounds amazing, but not when you consider that last year, 85% of Black women who participated in this poll said that the Democratic Party really spoke to their needs or met their needs. That's an 11-point drop in 1 year. And so I think that indicates to us that that's one data point indicating that, Black women are becoming disenchanted with the party. I did some digging and I looked at it earlier this year. A dozen Black female activists and elected officials, they penned an open letter to the chairman of the Democratic Party, Tom Perez, saying, listen, we have supported you. We support this party, but you don't seem to support us. Where is your commitment to acknowledging us, to including us in, some of the issues that we care about and that you were trying to go after? And unfortunately, it got a couple of headlines, but that open letter didn't really do much more than that. So I think there's growing angst. I think there's growing discontent among Black women who feel like, their vote is not being considered as important as some of the other demographics. And I call that they're called the side chicks, so to speak, of the Democratic Party. It's that woman who's always there, who's always there. You can always rely on them. And so you don't really have to woo them. You don't have to explain why you are the best person for them, why your ideas are the best to meet their needs. And I think that's where a lot of Black women are falling. I will just pull in here. We recently just heard some of the explosive revelations from Donna Brazile, who was the former chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, and she talked a lot about what's going on in the party, but she also raised some of the same concerns that Black women seem to be overlooked and that their voice is minimized. So this is not going away.
I know this is a tough question. It's hard to sort of generalize people in this way, but we are talking about Black women, and of course there's a lot of diversity within that subset of voters. But if we are using generalities, then what are some of the issues? I mean, does the Power of the Sister Vote study highlight some policy issues, or can you name some policy issues that you think of are, maybe disproportionate importance to this group because of the way that they're impacted?
Absolutely. So the Power of the Sister Vote does lay out some of the issues that are most important. Not surprisingly, and not very different from women in general, affordable health care is at the top of their list. Criminal justice reform, that's number 2, and that's really interesting because you consider that not only are Black women disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, being in it particularly at the state level, but when a member of their family is incarcerated for a long period of time, like a husband or a boyfriend or, a male breadwinner, these women are the ones who are left to pick up the family and keep the family running and providing shelter and providing for the needs of the family. So criminal justice reform is very important to them. Education is number 3 on their list, and living wage jobs. I mean, what's interesting is that issues that you would think women should care about, as we're told, things like reproductive rights, is actually number 9 or 10 on their list of issues that they really care about. So it tells us that, Black women, though a little bit different, a lot of the issues that we care about are very fundamental bread and butter issues that all women care about, that all people care about. Being able to provide for your family, having affordable health care, being able to find a job that pays you so that you can, take care of your family. These are not really that unique. I do think, though, that the criminal justice issue is a very important one, and it is one that is higher on the list for Black women.
Well, this my next question is something that I often ask myself, and I think we get asked this question a lot at Independent Women's Forum. But that is, where do we draw the line on identity politics? Because what we're talking about here sounds a lot like identity politics. We're grouping people based on demographic characteristics. And it seems like the left does a pretty good job doing this. I guess if we're being charitable, we call it targeted messaging or outreach. And if we're feeling less charitable, we call it pandering, right? So I guess this kind of targeting of specific groups of voters, I think there's this widespread attitude on the political right that it sort of thinks, well, what works for white people works for Black people, and what works for men works for women. And, ultimately we're all Americans. So there's really no need to talk about people in these groups. And there's no reason to, separate people into different, races and religions and genders and so forth. But we should just focus on good policies for everyone. So I want to ask you do you think that's a mistake that the political right is making? Do we need to spend more time focusing on benefits of conservative policy ideas for specific groups of people, or should we just talk about how good policy benefits everyone?
I'd like to believe that just focusing on good policy would be enough. I think it's a missed opportunity that I think the right falls into, unfortunately, which is that, assuming that everyone's experience is exactly the same and that every message will be received from the same messenger the same. And unfortunately, it's not the case. I mean, when you look at the Hispanic community, for example, when you're able to build they're very family oriented and community focused. And so, if you want to make headwinds from a policy perspective, I've seen a lot of grassroots organizations do well by going into the communities first, building a rapport, and using people who actually kind of speak the language, believe in the same thing, and also kind of look the same to say, okay, you can take out a lot of the partisan differences that you've been told because, you have a certain expectation that because you're Hispanic, you vote this way, or Black, you vote this way. No, let me show you somebody who maybe your sister or your cousin, and they think that this is a good policy idea. So here's why you should be open to that message. And I think that's where you can have some really great inroads. So I'm definitely an advocate for having messengers that represent the broad spectrum of our philosophical orientation. There are conservatives and libertarians of who look very different from what people consider them to look like. But at the end of the day, we have the right policy. We have the numbers on our side. We just have to have the right messaging and sometimes in some cases the right effective messengers at the end of the day. And whatever it takes to really win people over is what matters. I mean, we can say, well, I won't get into identity politics, or I don't want to micro target folks. But we individually, we kind of self-select into lots of groups. Like moms will naturally find other moms when we go to a new setting and talk about what connects us. We look for those similarities, and it's in those similarities that we're able to build trust and foster trust in what someone else says. And that's where then you can begin to push your ideas and make them resonate rather than just kind of throwing them out there and hoping somebody grasps at it. So that's my personal perspective.
Well, that's it's fascinating to me, Patrice. I just hope that more people on the right will be open to your suggestions and that our policy ideas can break through with people of all different backgrounds and all different persuasions. So I'm really hopeful for the future. I guess I should emphasize that just because there's a group like Black women who are feeling disillusioned with the Democratic Party, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're running, into the arms of the GOP, right?
They actually are not. They are going independent. And I'll tell you, the personal experience I've had when I wrote this piece and shared it on social media, I've had a number of Black women from out of the blue who contacted me and said, "Hey, I love I love what you wrote. I'm totally in agreement with that, but I'm not going to the Republican Party. I want to be independent. I want people to actually vie for my vote." And I tell them, that's fantastic. That is exactly what you as an engaged citizen should be doing. You should ensure that whomever you're going to cast your ballot for they're trying to appeal to you, excuse me, to explain to you why they are the best person or why their ideas are the best to meet your needs or to help your community. And so no one should take your vote for granted, but it's absolutely true. There is a bump in the number of Black women who are going independent. And that correlates. And there's actually no change in the number who are going to Republicans. So that tells you right there.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you're pretty open to chatting with folks on social media. So I hope it's okay with you if I share your Twitter handle.
Yes, please
Okay.
do. Please do.
You can find Patrice on Twitter at Patrice Pinkfile. And you can also reach out to IWF on Twitter at IWF. And we're on multiple other forms of social media as well. You can visit our flagship website, IWF.org. And there you can find Patrice's column called Black Women Leaving the Democratic Party, Cracking the Base. Thanks, Patrice, for joining me on today's IWF podcast. And to all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by IWF.org for similar content.